Hello and welcome, or should I say, witamy. Did I get that right? It's really nice to be here. Thanks for welcoming us. Actually, this is my first ever time to Poland, and already we've eaten dumplings and potato pancakes. Although it was at the airport, but I think that still counts. We're really happy to be here. We've got a few things to talk to you tonight about, which Sonia has very kindly summarized for us already. But first of all, does anyone want some free Bitcoin? Okay, so you're going to have to work for it, I'm afraid. I'm going to let Fabian explain our little Bitcoin giveaway promotion.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we thought how could we make it a bit more interesting or get people more involved. So yeah, giving away things always works. I've heard that from Sonia as well, so let's try it. So yeah, we decided to do a Bitcoin giveaway. So we're giving away it to 9 specific winners. So as you can read, the person who we think made the most funny creative tweet will receive free Bitcoin worth 100 euros. 3 people who get the most retweets on that tweet, so get their network involved, will be awarded with free Bitcoin worth 50 euros. And then 5 people who made a funny creative tweet again will be awarded with free Bitcoin worth 20 euros. So how to enter this giveaway? So steps to win during the event: send out a tweet about the event or the presentation and use first of all the hashtag bitFlyer Poland, so BF Poland, and tag bitFlyerEU, so that's our Twitter account. So another thing, unlimited entries. Each tweet counts as 1 entry, and the deadline for tweeting and basically entering this giveaway will be today, 11:59 p.m. So yeah, we will ultimately pick the winners on April 12th, 11:59 p.m. So that's tomorrow. And then you will get contacted shortly. And the last step, in order to actually claim this, you of course will need your bitFlyerEU account, and the free Bitcoin will be transferred. So yeah, these are the steps. Hopefully everyone will enter this giveaway, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks, Fabian. Yeah, we thought it'd be fun to do a Bitcoin giveaway, and then we realized that we need to make loads of rules and stuff, but hopefully it'll be okay. So, just to introduce myself, so I'm Andy Bryant, I'm the COO of bitFlyer in Europe, and my colleague over here is Rikiya Masuda, he's the CFO of bitFlyer in Europe. We're going to sort of divide and conquer tonight. I'm going to start by talking briefly about bitFlyer, try not to talk about us too much, because we've also got some other content for you. Rikiya is going to talk to you about regulation and ICOs, and then after the break I'll talk a bit about our blockchain and the way we see blockchain headed in general, and then finally Kian over there will be talking to you about some sort of trading techniques. But to start off, I'd like to take a step back at the beginning, just like get some perspective of where we are in the Bitcoin space. Loads of my friends are already saying to me, "Oh, yeah, it's way too late. We've missed the boat. There's no point investing in Bitcoin." I like to recall that like Bitcoin right now, I mean, it's come down a bit, of course, recently, but the total market cap is like 120 billion, and all of crypto combined is 260 billion. Now, that means Bitcoin's only worth, what, like 1.5 Warren Buffett's? It's only like 1/7 of an Amazon, and you can go much further. Physical gold, 8 trillion, stock market, 70 trillion. It's still really at the very early stages, and I'm not a big Bitcoin maximalist, but I think it helps to get some perspective and see exactly where we are in terms of Bitcoin's growth. In the last few years, Bitcoin and blockchain has come a long way. These are some of the events that we at bitFlyer think are sort of more notable in terms of the history. 2 of the things which we think was most attributable for Bitcoin's growth was when Ben Bernanke, the ex-chairman of the Federal Reserve, came out with a positive stance towards Bitcoin. And then the other thing was when the Japanese government revised the Payments Act, or aka the Fund Settlement Law, to actually legitimize Bitcoin as a payment method in Japan. As well as that, we've got, of course, things like Mt. Gox, Ethereum ICO in 2015, and more recently, a bunch of virtual currency exchanges in Japan have gained official registration. And then if we focus on Japan a bit more closely, of course we had the Mt. Gox incident in 2014. A few years later, Japan recognized Bitcoin as a legal payment option. In like July 2017, a lot of stores in Japan started accepting Bitcoin as an actual payment method in store, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. 2017 was a milestone in terms of the Japan FSA approved 11 virtual currency exchanges, of which we were number 3 on the list, but we were on the very first letter that went out from the FSA. But then it's not without its foibles. I mean, CoinCheck hack in 2018 January is just another reminder that we're still early in terms of development. People like to hear about Japan. I mean, it's kind of far away and you know, it's kind of not close to front of mind from Bitcoin enthusiasts in Europe and the US. If you've been there, you'll probably notice that there is quite a thriving crypto culture. From, for example, Monacoin, which is kind of like the Dogecoin of Japan, which actually is listed on bitFlyer's exchange. But other things too, like there's actually a J-pop band called Virtual Currency Girls, which is dedicated to cryptocurrencies, and like every single one of these band members, if you look closely, have got like, they're named after cryptocurrencies. So here's Bitcoin, here's Bitcoin Cash, NEM, and if you search for them online, you can find some pretty hilarious music videos. Other things like Bitcoin accepted in Japanese shops. You really can like go into shops in Japan and see like big signs like this, Bitcoin plastered all over the place. And then there's TV commercials. Here's bitFlyer's TV commercial in Japan, which, as far as I know, is one of the only TV commercials that have gone out based on cryptocurrency. And as you'll see, it probably wouldn't work so much in this market. Very effective, right?
A bit too Japanese.
A bit too Japanese, yeah. Bitcoin really is front of mind and within people's eyes in Japan, whether it's Bitcoin signs being shown in shops as a method of payment. We at bitFlyer have a payments business where we're all the time integrating with new companies to help them facilitate Bitcoin payments. One example is we recently engaged with HIS, which is the second or third largest travel agency in Japan. And then it all sort of comes back to this so-called idea of Mrs. Watanabe. Mrs. Watanabe is the kind of the image of like retail investors in Japan. Like in Japan, like there's a lot more interest and a lot more engagement from the retail community in investments. And it kind of all goes back to this idea that while Mr. Watanabe is at work, Mrs. Watanabe is at home sort of managing the household finances. And as a result, there's been a really historic and kind of long-term propensity of Japanese housewives to trade in the foreign exchange markets, for example. So there's kind of like a built-in culture. Japanese yen as a currency pair has been dominating trading for a while. Like this data is from CoinDesk just for the last 3 months of 2017. And as you can see, it basically dominates most crypto trading, Bitcoin trading too. And then if we take the Japanese market and break it down into exchanges, like bitFlyer has a dominating position ever since a couple of years ago. The yellow bar is our trading volumes over time. And that might explain why, by some measures, we're the largest exchange in the world in terms of volumes. Here's a ranking of us in terms of not just Bitcoin, but all digital currencies, and then domestic share over the over 24-hour period. But what I should mention is that this counts like two things. It counts our spot markets, but also our sort of FX. We call it bitFlyer FX, which includes leveraged trades. So if you count leverage as well as spot, then like we're dominating the market. But some measures exclude the leverage, which means the rankings are a bit different. But we, of course, we like to look at this. So just in terms of numbers, 2017, we traded 250 billion worth of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And actually, the year to date for January to November was 100 billion. So just in half of November and December alone, we had 150 billion in volume because there was such a spike. But in general, we're facilitating over 50 billion a month in trades, and we recently announced that we've reached 2 million registered users. So why have you never heard of us? Well, our story in the EU has only just begun. We actually were incorporated in 2014, and we were live a few months later that year. In terms of milestones, our CEO and founder, Yuzo Kanao, has been very instrumental in guiding policy and guiding the debate about Bitcoin in terms of regulation in Japan. He actually was responsible for forming the JADA, which is the Japan Association of Digital Assets, back in October 2014, and he's continued to be very involved since then. In fact, he was a key role. He played a key role in actually drafting the change to the Digital Payments Act in Japan. The BitCamera partnership, BitCamera being the largest electronics retailer in Japan, was another big milestone. That's where we integrated our payments technology to let people spend Bitcoin in the stores. And then more recently, the US launched in November. We launched from our San Francisco office, and the EU was a couple of months behind them. So January really this year was when we established our main footprint in the EU. So we're trying to repeat our success in Japan, but little by little. That's probably why you haven't heard of us yet, but hopefully this time next year we'll be a household name. Incidentally, in Japan we have like a 50% household brand recognition, which we're pretty pleased with. I was talking about payments earlier. Here's a short video of actually how our bitFlyer Pay works. This is in a BitCamera store. So there are lots of companies out there that are offering so-called like Bitcoin debit cards and Bitcoin cards and so forth, but like they're not really. The way they generally work is you have a debit card and you top it up with Bitcoin, but at the point you top it up, it gets converted to fiat. Then it remains on the card as fiat, and you transact in fiat in the usual way. It's only really, in my mind, it's only really when you integrate with the point of sale that it's truly a Bitcoin payment. When you can actually go into a shop, pick up a toaster, and say, okay, I want to pay with Bitcoin right now. And that way you're not really exposed to having a prepaid card which is fluctuating in value. Of course the value fluctuates in Bitcoin, but the exchange is happening at the point of sale. So here's an example of how it works. All you need is an iPad in the store, so it's a pretty seamless integration. Or an iPhone. And then just one of the sort of slightly more interesting recent developments is we just announced, again, on the payment side, a new integration with Lopario, which is a luxury car dealership in Japan, which are now using bitFlyer technology to facilitate Bitcoin as a payment option. So you literally can now buy a Lambo using Bitcoin. And finally, before I end just the introduction of bitFlyer, we do try to get involved with many of the regulatory developments. We think that regulation is fundamental to the future of virtual currencies, and we try to set a global standard in this regard. And so one of the things we're involved in is actually developing an actual cyber insurance policy with Mitsui Sumitomo, which is the second or third largest insurer in Japan, because we think this is a key component of customer protection and consumer protection going forward. So that's enough about us. I mean, I think it's impossible to talk about blockchain without talking about regulation, and it's impossible to talk about regulation without at least bringing up ICOs. So I'm going to hand over to Rikiya at the moment to take you through this next section. Thanks, Rikiya.
Thanks, Adi. Hello everyone, this is Rikiya from bitFlyer. I'm CFO of bitFlyer and this is also my first time to come to Poland, and so far my experience is great, except for traffic jam, but I love this country, I like it. So thank you so much for your time today, and then let me talk a bit about regulations and ICOs. So first of all, let me ask one question. Before this event, how many people have actually ever heard of bitFlyer? That's more than I expected. Right. And how many of you actually have an account with bitFlyer? Great, one. Okay, great, thanks. So, yeah, actually as Andy just mentioned, we just got licensed in Europe as a payment institution in Luxembourg in January this year. But at the same time, we also have registered as the virtual currency exchange in Japan based on the so-called cryptocurrency law. And then also we are regulated in the US, and then we are one of the 4 licensed exchange licensed by New York State. So we believe that the compliance is one of our key value, and then the regulation, the appropriate regulatory framework will support the further development of this industry.
We're the only exchange regulated in Japan, the US, and the EU combined right now. Right, thanks.
And then, so why Japan is a bit advanced in the regulatory framework? Actually, Japan has the so-called Virtual Currency Act, which is precisely the Amendment of Payment Act. So now the Bitcoin and other virtual currencies are considered as a payment method. And then if you want to operate virtual currency exchange like us in Japan, or to Japanese resident, you need license. And then there are already 16 exchanges approved in Japan. But then there are more than 100 applications waiting in the pipeline. So why Japan is ahead of the curve? And the very first incident we had in Japan was, probably most of you know, about Mt. Gox. So Mt. Gox was incorporated in Japan, and then as you may know, they got bankrupt. And then that made Japanese regulators aware of Bitcoin and then necessity of regulation in this industry to protect consumers. And then the founder of bitFlyer, Yuzo Kano, also playing an important role in lobbying the governors or lawmakers. And then the Japan actually implemented the new law, which is called virtual currency law, which specifically regulates the virtual currency exchange activity. And as Andy earlier mentioned, the Japanese people, especially in the FX trading market, they are pretty active. Retail consumers are pretty active in this market, so it also further enhanced the regulatory framework for this business. And if you look at the regulatory snapshot in Asia, there's no clear regulatory situation. It's a bit difficult to precisely describe this, but it's China. We all remember that China recently banned its ICOs, exchanges, and so on and so forth. And then in India, it's also illegal. But of course, Japan is green. And then, so this is the overview for regulatory situation of Europe. But actually, I want to ask some of you to volunteer to talk a bit about regulatory situation for cryptocurrencies in Poland. Because I heard that there are quite recent activities in this from this point of view. Sorry.
Government is illegal. Bitcoin is legal in Poland, of course.
Thanks. Yeah. So again, there is no clear, how do I say, the clear situation. It's not really clear whether the cryptocurrency is legal or illegal, because it also depends on how the cryptocurrency is used. Trading is okay, but payment is not okay, and so on and so forth. And the next, and also I'd like to talk a bit about ICOs. Although the biggest topic in early years in 2015 was probably overstock fundraising, but after that, especially from the second half of last year, ICO is becoming more and more popular, and then actually the funds raised via ICO is much bigger than VC funding. And then also in this year, we just got a huge announcement from Telegram. It was almost 1.7 billion funding. But these all happened quite recently. So this is to show how the ICO funding evolves. So let's take a minute to see what's going on. So in 2014, we didn't have a lot of ICOs. We just 1.8 million. And then later, it's 2014, it became roughly 10 million. But for these years, the amount is not that big. It's just a couple millions. And then it continues 2015, second half of 2015. It stays almost cold activity. And then now it's 2016. It's still a small amount, 52, 58 million. And then we got DAO project. And then suddenly the total cumulative amount becomes close to 300 million. And then 2017, watch out. So then second half of 2017, suddenly the cumulative amount grows. Yeah. So this is now where we are. And so in many countries, I think most of the countries, there's no specific regulations or specific regulation for ICOs. But if I take an example of regulation, ICO regulation in Japan, it's also the same. There's no specific regulation or law which specifically regulates ICO itself. But depending on the nature of ICO or scheme of the ICO, it may become under the regulation of existing laws such as Virtual Currency Act law, or a Payment Act, a Consumer Contract law, and so on and so forth. So if you want to participate in ICO, or even if you want to do an ICO in Japan or to Japanese resident, it is really important to understand what kind of regulatory framework you need to understand or you need to be aware of. And we can, roughly speaking, we can categorize in Japan the ICO into 4 categories, like the fiat currency type ICO, virtual currency type ICO, dividend type ICO, e-money type ICO, and then no reward type ICO. And based on these 5 categories, there are multiple different regulations and laws you need to follow. And then, as I said earlier, it's still not clear, and then there's no specific regulation for ICO, but the making rule is really important to further enhance the development of crypto industry. So there are multiple initiatives in Japan to set the rule to properly manage ICO project and provide a proper legal framework so that we can more develop this ICO project in Japan. And then this is also one of the initiatives, the founder of bitFlyer participating as technical advisor. And so there are some of initiatives going on. And then I think now is the time to stop talking about regulatory stuff and then talk about a bit more fun stuff. Pizza time?
Yes, and just to mention that after the break, we will have a few more presentations from bitFlyer.
And I appreciate that there are people of different levels here, so I don't want to go into too much detail on the basics. But just to cover all our bases, we'll start at the beginning. So, blockchain, the simple definition is it's a shared network database. It's a new kind of database where data can't be tampered with. It repairs itself. It doesn't crash. And the key thing is that only information that is agreed upon is recorded to the network. The JBA, which was founded or co-founded by our CEO, has a slightly more technical definition. They talk about Byzantine fault tolerance, uses a large number of nodes to form consensus, and it's got a probabilistic method for consensus where over time the probability of a transaction being reversed approaches 0. And all of this blockchain stuff kind of all came about in the frame context of the Byzantine generals problem. Now, I'll try not to get too technical about this, but the way I imagine the reason it's called the Byzantine generals problem is it goes back to a kind of old story, like a mathematical problem that imagined a Byzantine attack, a bunch of generals surrounding a city, all surrounding it in different places, and the idea is the attack will only succeed if they all attack at the same time. Otherwise, their attack will be repelled and it will fail. So the only way for the generals to be coordinated is to send messages to each other in advance, basically saying, we attack at dawn at 8 a.m. Trouble is, by the time you send a messenger through the city to get out the other side, or round the edge to deliver this message, the message can become corrupted, right? So how do you make sure that the coordinated timing is in fact the truth, like the real truth? And this is a problem that kind of stumped mathematicians for quite a while, and it was kind of solved quite elegantly with Satoshi Nakamoto's blockchain. And that's really it. I mean, when you have a blockchain, you have a distributed record of transactions, and the idea is, even if you have bad actors that try to corrupt the message, the fact that you've got so many copies of it distributed and shared means that that can't be done. And then proof of work just keeps everyone honest. And the way we at bitFlyer think about why are people getting so excited about blockchain? I mean, it's not just the speculation on cryptocurrencies. The technology is obviously very powerful, and we're kind of in line with the World Economic Forum's view. So, I won't talk to these at length, but by giving everyone a copy of the ledger, it means that reconciliation becomes much easier. You don't need to sort of track multiple different ledgers to make sure that ownership is being tracked properly. Efficiency gains in terms of real-time monitoring, like if you have a regulator and a regulated entity, the regulator doesn't have to basically ask for information, they can just sort of track on the blockchain, they can audit the blockchain themselves. And then there's other things like, one thing I quite like is liquidity and capital improvement. This whole thing about ICOs, I mean, yeah, it's kind of a crazy bubble, but in principle, ICOs are kind of not just some speculative instrument. Like the principle of ICOs, I think, is great. The fact that it gives new types of incentive structures where somebody can actually be rewarded for being an early adopter of a new project. I mean, that wasn't really possible with the typical shareholder structure, right? You wouldn't get any gain from being one of the first 100 users of Twitter. But if you had somehow got some stake in Twitter's network in that early stage, then over time, that pays off. So it creates these new incentive structures that allows completely new business models. And then of course, until now, people like you and me didn't really have access to these kind of early stage investments. It's really for VCs only. Whereas now, anyone can access these types of VC-style opportunities and have liquidity in their investments. It doesn't get tied up for 10 years like a typical VC investment. So, plenty of value drivers. But then, how do we turn that into use cases? So this is kind of how we see the future of blockchain. Obviously, kind of right now we're here with a few ICOs doing this. Once you have a token of value and a way of registering documents, then that facilitates the sharing economy. So now you can track assets and things on the blockchain. Through smart contracts, we can get to sort of transaction controls, and transaction controls allows things like wills, automated logic and algorithmic programmable contracts, IoT, so forth. And then once you start getting into the supply chain, provenance of goods, checking that your diamonds are not a blood diamond, checking the authenticity of your meat, checking that your lasagna isn't made of horse like it was in the UK, there was some scandal. And really, there's huge potential. So convert yen to US dollars, you divide by 100 roughly, right? So we think 3 trillion US dollars, and that's only by 2030 is the market opportunity for blockchain. And I'll just talk briefly about our blockchain at bitFlyer. So at bitFlyer we have a few businesses. Our main business is of course the virtual currency exchange, where we have a more professional version of the platform called Lightning, which is kind of a bit like GDAX. And then we have a much more B2C, consumer-friendly, easy buy-sell feature as well. As well as the exchange, we have miyabi, which is our own private enterprise blockchain. And then we have the payments business as well and some other bits and bobs. Our miyabi product has a bunch of patents, which makes it among one of the few private blockchains to have that kind of credibility. And we think it's the world's fastest performance. So capable of up to 2,000 transactions per second, and on the right hardware up to 6,000 transactions per second. And that's with the real payload. I mean, there are some blockchains that say, oh, we can do way faster than that. But you need to benchmark it properly. And when you benchmark these types of transactions with the same payload, we truly believe that ours is top tier. We've developed our own consensus algorithm, execution engine, and other common components. And in terms of some of the properties, these are the main ones. So distributed availability means basically it's resistant to disasters. You can still access it even if large segments of the network goes down. Immutability, I'm sure you're all familiar with. You need to be able to make sure that the data, once recorded, can't be changed, or at least by a bad actor. Byzantine fault tolerance, I described earlier. No single point of failure. Of course, this is a key one. You want to make sure that it's resistant to things going wrong. And then the last one, which is a bit harder to read because I highlighted it, is finality. So when you're working in financial services industry or for financial services clients, finality is really important. With Bitcoin and other public blockchains, they have proof of work, they have like a probabilistic algorithm, which means that the more blocks it goes down, the chances of a transaction being reversed increases like ever closer to zero, but it never quite gets to zero. Even though it's like vanishingly small chance, that's still not good enough for many of the institutions we talk to. Like they really need to have finality, and that's like one of the key things which separates us from the rest. And in fact, we try to map this on this diagram. Like the development of databases, like starts at the top. We've got different types of database, right? There's like key value, graph, object orientated, and we include blockchains like within the same topography. So if you add distributed networking, you've basically got Apache Cassandra. If you then add immutability, then we've got the R3 project. Still not Byzantine fault tolerant though, so if you want to add that, now we're kind of in this area, which still includes public blockchains, but also includes Hyperledger Fabric and miyabi as private chains. The difference between Hyperledger and miyabi is no single point of failure. And then once you get down to that level, the only difference really between miyabi and these is that we have finality, whereas public blockchains do not. So that's how we look at things. And it's not just on the drawing boards. I mean, we do have real-world applications and projects going on with miyabi. I mean, there's loads going on that I can't tell you about, but one of the things I can tell you about is we were selected actually as a partner vendor for the Japanese Bankers Association, or JBA's collaborative blockchain platform. The JBA is basically the network through which all of Japan's national banks communicate and settle. So it really is like, national level project. And we were up with heavyweights such as NTT Data, Hitachi and Fujitsu, and actually we were the only sort of startup or like medium-sized company to be included in the project. So we're pretty pleased about that. So that ends the section on trading. So thank you again, and I'd like to hand over to Kian, who's going to talk to you a bit about Lightning and trading on Lightning, which is our professional trading platform. Thanks, Kian.
Thank you, Andy. So my name is Kian Simon. I'm an intern here at bitFlyer and I'm going to be discussing the trading portion of this presentation. So here at bitFlyer, we have a saying, it's we love traders, and that's for several reasons. First of all, we believe that we have a professional platform that is top of the line in the industry, and it has several features, including profit loss, conditional order types, a wide array of indicators and overlays, as well as an API. And it was designed by former Goldman Sachs traders, for traders, so by traders, for traders, and we really do love traders. Our customer support strives to be top of the line, as well as our development, and of course we like to do everything we can to make sure that we are the most regulated exchange in the world. So here's a screenshot of the Lightning trading platform. As you can see, we have the chart, bid and ask window, execution history, as well as the daily profit loss, and we even have a little chat room where you can talk with your fellow traders, and updates of current news and events that are going on that could possibly affect price. This is a simplified version of our trading platform. We call it buy or sell. And through here you can buy Bitcoin as well as other altcoins. This is better for people who are just beginning or trying to learn, or people who are kind of overwhelmed by the amount of data and indicators and all the crazy stuff going on Lightning. So this is a good place to start if you're just getting into it, or if you just want to keep it simple. It's also available as an app. So before we get into the order types, I like to use this analogy of a school system. We're going to start simple and move our way to more complex. So you guys are all in kindergarten, And by the end of this presentation, hopefully you all graduate Trading University. And this chart will stay on during the trading slides so that everyone can know where we are. And before I continue, I just wanted to ask, how many of you guys have ever traded cryptocurrencies of any kind? Okay. How many of you guys have placed a stop order while trading? Okay. And how many of you guys have placed an IFD OCO order while trading? Oh, okay, we got one. All right, well, hopefully after I go over these, maybe some of you guys will be interested in looking these up a little bit more and trying them out for yourselves. So first and foremost, we have the market order. It's the simplest order type. This order is good for when you want to emphasize the execution of the order above everything else. So if you're really trying to get into a position and it's irrelevant for you, like if it's plus or minus a couple $100. If you really want to get into a position, this is the fastest way to do it. You just put a buy order and market. Or if you really want to get rid of something, you just can put in a sell order with market. And that'll just execute the order for buy at the lowest price available at the time that you place it. And for sell, it will execute at the highest price available at the time that you place it. Oh, and this is the bid and ask window. And through here, you can see what trades are going on. And so the ask window is what people who are selling their Bitcoins or other cryptocurrencies are asking for, the price that they're asking for. And the bid window is what people are bidding for, the price that people want to buy the specific currency at. And the difference between the ask and the bid is called the spread. And so it's always good to take a look at what the spread is before you put in a market order, otherwise you might get surprised with what price the order executes at. Moving on, we've now graduated to elementary school. Congratulations, everyone. Give yourselves a pat on the back. So this is only different from the market order in that there's one parameter, and that is you can set the price that you want the order to execute at. And so this gives you the advantage of more control over the order. So you can say, I want to buy Bitcoin at 7,000. If you're very specific about what number you want to execute your order at, then a limit order can do that for you. The disadvantage might be that it could take a longer time to execute if there's no orders available at the price that you're looking for. So, yeah. Next, we have the stop order. Very similar to a limit order. However, instead of a price that you set what's called a trigger price. And the trigger price can be higher or lower than the market order. But once the trigger is hit, an order is then placed at market. So you set the trigger price, say, I want to execute this order, I want this order to go in at 7,000. Once the last market price hits 7,000, a market order is then placed. And that could vary based on what's going on in the trading. But moving on, we have the marriage of the stop and limit orders into the stop limit order type. And so this combines the parameters of the limit and stop order. So you have your price and trigger price. And so now, instead of just saying, oh, I want my Bitcoin to sell at 6,000, you can say, I want my Bitcoin to sell at 6,000 after it passes 5,900. Or if you're selling, you can say, I want to sell my Bitcoin at 7,100 after it passes 7,050. So this gives you a little bit more control while remaining relatively simple. And again, the advantage is that it gives you more control over the order, and the disadvantage would be that it's possible it won't execute if there's no orders available for that price. Now we have a trailing stop. The trailing stop order is basically very similar to a regular stop order, except now the trigger price or the offset price will automatically adjust to the market price. And so on bitFlyer Lightning, we have a pound amount or dollar amount or euro amount, my bad. And basically, you can set, the advantage to this is that you can set your trigger price, your offset price, and then it'll automatically adjust as the market fluctuates. And so if you do your research and set this correctly, then you can pretty much set one of these orders and leave it be and maybe check it tomorrow. So it gives you some more flexibility, and a lot of people will have several of these orders open at the same time, and will adjust accordingly. So now we're going to move into conditional order types. In my experience, I think these are unique to bitFlyer Lightning. I haven't seen these on any other trading platforms that I've used personally. So the IFD stands for if done order. It's a pretty simple condition. Basically, you can set your first order, which is your primary order, and it will execute a second order if and only if the conditions for the first order are met. So this can be very useful for people who want to plan a couple steps ahead, and people who have done extensive research and know what's going on, or if you're just trying to test the waters and see like what kind of things are going on in the market. It's very useful for entry points by setting your profit target first, and you can also use it for stop loss. But let's keep going on to the next order type, which is the OCO. And the OCO is similar to the IFD in that it's a conditional. However, instead of now one order being executed after the other, you have a either or you just have one. So you set two orders, and once the conditions for one of the orders are met, that order will go through and the other one will automatically cancel. So this is very useful for volatile markets or for risk management and making sure that you play it safe for just in case something happens that you weren't expecting. And then next we can talk about the IFD OCO, which is a combination. So the OCO use case, so one example that you could use the OCO for would be a bracket order. And so you could set a limit order and a stop order next to each other. And depending if your calculations are right, you can take your profit. And if things go unexpectedly, you have your stop loss serving as a safety so that you can limit your losses. So this is pretty cool. This is the IFD OCO, otherwise known as IFO. And so this is a marriage of the IFD and OCO. Of course, as you can see, you can set any kind of parameters for these. So you can have a market order for your IFD, and then you could have a stop limit and trailing for your OCO. It's really all up to you. But this is the most complex conditional order type. And it's very useful because you can use this to really minimize your risk and also make sure that you realize a majority of your profits. So let's talk about an example of how you'd use this IFD OCO. So let's say that you're trading Bitcoin and it's fluctuating around 5,500 euros. So, and you're bullish on Bitcoin. So let's say, in this scenario, we would place a stop order at 6,000 euros, and then we set the OCO to one for taking profits and one to stop loss. So since we set the first condition at buy at 6,000. Well, once the price at 6,000, that will be executed, and then we wait and see for what happens after that. And I guess if your calculations are right, you would take your profit at 8,000, and just in case something else happened, like many of you know, cryptocurrency markets are really volatile in general. So you have your stop loss just in case things don't go as planned. Personally, I really like the IFDOCO because you can just make sure that you don't lose too much when you're trading. And just really quickly, on all order types, we have these execution parameters. By default, you have the GTC, or good till cancel, and this is basically when you place an order, it will stay open until it's either filled or until you cancel it yourself. So this is the default on all orders, and then you have your fill or kill or immediate or cancel, which are pretty similar. The only difference being that the fill or kill, when you place it, if it's not filled in its entirety the second that you place it, it will just be canceled. And the immediate or cancel will allow a portion, that order to be partially filled, and then will be canceled, even though it was only partially filled. The fill or kill is useful for finding hidden liquidity, so you can maybe discover a price point that people don't know about, and then the immediate or cancel is useful for testing price points. So, for example, you could be using immediate or cancel to be testing different price points, and once you find a good one, you could then be putting in more fill or kills. So, technical analysis. What is technical analysis? So, technical analysis is basically the science of price action. In traditional finance, this is way more established. People have been using this for a really long time in stock markets and all that, and people have adapted it to use it for crypto, even though there is no established method of technical analysis for crypto. People have still done really well in adapting it for it, and like in traditional finance, you use market data, you use financial reports, balance sheets to make decisions on what stocks or investments you want to make. But price act or technical analysis doesn't include any of that. So in the same way in crypto, technical analysis doesn't really include white papers or the usability of the blockchain or how good the crypto it really is. We're really just looking at the price action and making decisions off of that to forecast future movements. So here's a couple of screenshots of the indicators and overlays available on bitFlyer Lightning. As you can see, there's a bunch of stuff on here, and I'm assuming that most of you have a pretty good idea of what most of these are. However, some of these are pretty complicated, and explaining all of these would probably keep you guys here all the way to the morning, so I'm not going to do that, and I also can't do that. So I'm just going to talk about the ones that I use personally and that I think are important. So the three that I started with and the three that are my favorite are the MACD, RSI, and Bollinger Bands. So the MACD is used primarily to indicate strength and direction of price trends. It's calculated using the 26-day EMA minus the 12-day EMA, which is the exponential moving average, I think. And the signal line is used as a reference point. You look at the MACD line, and whenever the MACD crosses over the signal line, that usually means that things are looking bullish. And whenever the MACD crosses below the signal line, usually moving bearish. Then we have our RSI, which stands for Relative Strength Indicator, not to be confused with Relative Strength. So the RSI is very often, along with the MACD, the default indicators that are on most trading platforms. They can be used very well hand in hand. The RSI is more for indicating momentum. So you can use it to see when an asset is being overbought or oversold. Whenever the RSI crosses above 70, that's usually when an asset is being overbought and could indicate future drops. And when it crosses below 30, that's when an asset is usually oversold. Just a quick note, none of these are absolute. You know, there's a reason why people use multiple indicators in conjunction with each other, especially Bollinger Bands. These are invented by John Bollinger, and these are mostly used to indicate volatility. And these, as well as the RSI, these can be used to identify when an asset is overbought or oversold. And if you guys want to learn more about these, there's really great sources out there, including the ones that I used for this presentation. One of those would be Investopedia.com. They have really good tutorials on all the different indicators and overlays. And believe it or not, Wikipedia actually has some pretty good content on this as well. So the thing is that these look really intimidating and technical, but if you really can learn how to read them and use them to your advantage without understanding them at like a really deep fundamental level. So even though you maybe wouldn't be able to explain it like a college professor to someone else, you can still use it to as a indicator for when you want to make your entry points on an asset or exit points. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you all very much. One quick note, we do have a competition still open. I believe that only 1 or 2 people have entered. We are giving away free Bitcoin, so I'm not sure why that's a thing, but be sure to enter. There's going to be first, second, and third place, and then an additional 5 winners. So a bunch of people could win a bunch of free Bitcoin tonight. I mean, who doesn't want an appreciating asset?
Thanks, Ken. So we want to give you guys a chance to ask us some questions about anything we've talked about this evening. I believe there's also somebody here to help answer some questions about the recent changes to the tax regime here in Poland. It's definitely not our field of expertise, so I think what we'll do is we'll take questions first, and then after there are no further questions, then we'll hand over at that stage. So, any takers? Someone get a microphone.
Hello. Okay, so can you tell us more about finality in your blockchain?
Sure. I am not on the blockchain engineering team, so I can't really go into the technical details, but we can maybe take it offline. I'm sorry, I can't be more.
Yeah, because in comparison with Bitcoin, because in Bitcoin you have finality unless someone modifies. When the block is joined, it is. You can say it's final unless it will be invalidated later. Like someone forks it and then it's no finality, right? So in your blockchain that cannot happen. You cannot.
That's right. Yeah. Once a transaction is added to the miyabi blockchain, it is 100% final. So there's no decreasing probability of reversal. It is then irreversible at that time.
Okay, and what if you add that abnormal node instead of a normal node?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Because you have normal nodes and abnormal nodes, right? So what if the node you have just added is the abnormal node?
We do have Byzantine fault tolerance as well.
I have a question about the US market, because I saw that
Sure.
you don't have the license in all states, right? And my question is is it
way harder to get the license in those states, or do they not provide any license at all?
So it's a mixture. So far we've secured licenses, or at least the right to operate in 43 states. Now, that doesn't mean we've got a license in every state, because actually there are some states where you don't need a license, but you can still operate.
All right.
So right now we've got the ability to operate in 43 states, and yes, like most of the ones that do require a license, it's usually a money transmitted license from the respective state regulator. The hardest one to get, of course, was the BIT license, which is the New York DFS license, where we were only the 4th company to ever get one, after Ripple, Coinbase, and Circle, and the first overseas company ever to get one. But yeah, that was quite a big task.
All right, and do you think that the states in the future will change their law, that there will be like one global license for the whole USA, I mean on the federal level? Or did you have to like go to each state one by one and ask about the license?
Yeah, we had to do that, one by one. But to be honest, I think in the future, it won't be a question of like crypto regulation and normal regulation. Like, it will just be regulation, right? So it'll gradually all become intertwined into the same thing. So we don't see like some bifurcation in the regulatory regime. We just see it all gradually integrating over time as the state and federal regulators come to understand blockchain more deeply.
Right,
thanks.
There are some initiatives to make some
Like a state level regulation, but this is not about crypto specific, but more about regulation in general in the US.
Hi, I have a question about the miyabi blockchain. You showed some numbers for the benchmark, and does this blockchain support only simple value transfer transactions or smart contracts, and what kind of transactions were involved in this benchmark?
We absolutely support smart contracts and not just simple transactions, so we have a data structure that can support all sorts of different things, and it's very flexible to different use cases. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
I have seen that you offer leverage trading on your platform. Economically, leverage trading is a contract for difference, yes? A CFD. Is it like, did you like register it legally as a CFD or?
Yeah, like our presentation was a bit confusing, but the services we just showed here is the service platform in Japan. And then as a bitFlyer SA, we're not yet providing the leverage trading. And then this may or may not fall under the regulation, but we are still investigating and then still in a discussion phase. So we do not sell this product in Europe. So.
Okay, and as a European citizen, I can only register on your European platform. I cannot register at your Japan.
If you are really interested in a CFD trading or leverage trading, talk to me later. There is a way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for bringing us to university. I don't know if I have to ask you guys or the guy who was asking about trading, because one of the biggest challenges I always have is like how much of the trading is basically on technical part and how much of that is basically going back to the emotional part of that, right? Because I just see sometimes like from technical analysis, I know something is gonna go low, and then tomorrow somebody says, oh, because Russians did ban the ICOs, then the price went down. So it was like, how can I just start putting a stop loss on something that tomorrow all of my technical analysis is going to be somehow, like be effective with all those elements? Thank you.
Okay, so the topic of like fundamental versus technical analysis is like, would take us, we could talk for hours about this. I mean, personally, I think that like I would take a balanced approach, like technical helps for risk management and fundamentals help for the long term. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like Bitcoin and other speculative assets, they are subject to wild price swings. It used to be a lot worse. I feel like volatility is decreasing, but we've got to remember that, like I was saying in one of the very early slides, Bitcoin as an asset class is still really small, right? So I like to kind of liken it to a dinghy on the open sea. You have like the foreign exchange markets where like trillions and trillions of dollars are traded like every hour, every day, or at least like hundreds of billions. And if that was like an oil tanker on the sea, you can imagine like waves of money coming and going, and the ship barely budges, right? With Bitcoin, it's like a tiny little boat, so the same amount of money flowing backwards and forwards causes it to go up and down, right? It just can't handle that kind of influx. So it's true to say that it doesn't take much. It only takes like a small rumor or some small story to potentially cause like a big price change, because it doesn't take that much money flowing in and out for that to happen. I think volatility will decrease over time. I think instruments like the CME and the CBOE futures, like ETFs, which are going to come online soon, a lot of institutional investors waiting on the sidelines until Bitcoin and crypto became something more comfortable that they're happy to deal with. These kind of trends will lend itself to lower volatility, but in the meantime, we can still expect a certain amount of roller coaster ride going forward.
And also, from compliance point of view, the thing I may need to mention about is, although we try to build some features, we have some features to protect some trading loss, but at the same time, we are not in a position to give you an advice of the investment. So for your investment, it still belongs to your own responsibility. So please be careful about this.
Any more questions? Okay.
Hi guys, I've got a question. How many coins will be on the bitFlyer exchange Europe? It will be only Bitcoin, Litecoin, or there will be more tokens or coins? What are your plans?
So we currently offer only BTC Euro currency pair, but this is because we just launched our service, and in Japan we offer BTC JPY and then a BTC Ethereum BTC, a Bitcoin Cash BTC, and also some other fiat crypto pairs like Litecoin, Ethereum Classic, a Mona coin, which is like a Japan unique coin, and Lisk, and am I missing something? Yep. So yeah, we are preparing to provide more services in Europe. So what should I say? Yeah, what's this space?
Any more questions? Anyone? Or shall we go to the taxation part? Okay, one more question.
Okay, so you're generally for regulation. You see it as the way. Are you not worried about said regulation? Because, as you said, capitalization of cryptocurrencies is like 200 billion, and the banking establishment has like trillions, and they give billions to lobbyists. Are you not worried about that?
So our view on regulation is, we do believe that the appropriate regulation will help this industry to grow, and then especially the cryptocurrencies or blockchain technology become more and more popular among normal individuals. We do need some legal framework, a regulatory framework to protect consumers, to enhance the healthy development of this industry. So we are not afraid of regulation, but we are kind of willing to discuss and talk to regulators or some authorities, and then more than happy to give them an advice on how the regulation should look like. And this is what we've been doing in Japan for more than 3 years.
Any more questions? No one. Okay, so thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much.